So our objectives and standards to understand the different methods of research and compare and contrast different types of psychological research. If you would please take a look at the standards. Okay, so we have some vocabulary here. Sample is out of a total population, a relatively small group used for investigation. Naturalistic observation, a psychologist studies a subject in a natural environment without interfering. Case study is a type of research method that involves intensive investigation of one or more participants. A survey is a method of research where information is obtained by asking many individuals a fixed set of questions. Longitudinal study is data that is collected for individuals over many years and compared to observe characteristics change or remain the same. Cross-sectional study is data collected on individuals of different ages and compared to see the differences among the groups. A correlation, I'm sorry I messed up saying that, is a measure of a relationship between two variables or sets of data. A hypothesis is an educated guess about a relationship between two variables. A variable are behaviors and conditions that are subject to change. Experimental group, individuals that are exposed to the independent variable. And control group is the individuals that are not exposed to the independent variable. And our central question, how do psychologists use research? Okay, so gathering information. So psychologists gather information carefully and systematically. Similar to taking a poll about what movie to go see with friends, like you may possibly do, psychologists work the same way. And over the years, psychologists have developed ways of gathering and analyzing data. So research begins by asking a limited question about a certain topic. Ways to achieve this can vary for different psychologists. So for example, a social psychologist may use an experiment to understand group pressure. We'll talk about experiments. And then a psychologist that is interested in personalities may use case studies instead. So there's different methods of research that we're going to talk about that psychologists can use. So let's try a sample. So imagine that a psychologist wants to know how the desire for college affects high school seniors and juniors. Now, it would be practically impossible to study every junior and senior in the country, right? So the psychologist would select a small group of individuals from the population. You can see in the image there, the population is the blue circle, from the population of high school juniors and seniors. And they would take that, what we call the sample. Now the sample must be a representative of the population of the sample. Okay? If a sample does not include those things, it is considered non-representative. And we'll talk about that. Now there are two ways to avoid a non-representative sample. One of these is choosing from a random sample where every person has an equal opportunity of being chosen. So again, if we had a population of high school juniors and seniors, let's say, I'm just going to circle it here. Here's our population of high school juniors and seniors. To make a random sample, the psychologist would select every third person. So again, you can see they choose from each a random number of the population. So every third person would be selected for the sample. That's one way to do it. Another way to avoid is a stratified sample. Now this involves choosing individuals from various subgroups such as males and females. So let's say maybe our blue group here is people who are teenagers, our red group are people who are in college, and our green group are people who have college degrees or whatever. So what the psychologist would do is take a different number of people from each group. So you can see they took one person from maybe the teenage group, they took two from the college group, and they took one from the group that maybe has a degree. And then they would question them. So that's another way to avoid a non-representative group. So let's talk about different methods of research. So psychologists use different methods of research to accomplish their goals. One of these is the naturalistic observation. And to do this, they want to know how people or animals behave naturally without interfering. So they can observe people or animals in their natural environment without disturbing them. So I put a picture down here This is Dr. Jane Goodall. She is famous for studying apes in Africa and seeing how they interact and react to each other, and understanding their behavior and things like that. So she studied them in a natural environment. Another way is a case study. Now, case studies involve intensive studies of a person or a group. It involves a long-term observation that includes diaries, interviews, and tests. Now, these can be a powerful research tool, but the problem is a case study cannot prove or disprove something, so that's kind of a negative of it. But however, it can help build material that can lead to further hypothesis or further guesses. So a survey, I'm sure many of you have heard of a survey before or done surveys. You've done one in class already, hopefully. A practical way to gather data on a large group of people is through a survey. Surveys can involve questions, interviews, or both. And the question or interview can be modified if the person does not understand, which is beneficial, since if a person says, well, I don't understand the question, can you explain it? And then that would help build data. Questions can also be all the same and take less time to administer. And they can also reduce influence by the researcher. So, for example, if I say to you, what's your favorite color, and you say purple, and I kind of frown and say, that's not the right answer, you might go back and say, well, no, I meant green, And I might say, oh, okay, and smile. And then so people will, change their opinion by the reaction of the person giving the question. So again, if I say, what's your favorite purple? And you say, what's your favorite purple? What's your favorite color? You say purple, and I kind of make a face. You might go, oh, well, no, I meant green, blue, yellow. You might change your answer. A survey you take by yourself typically, and it might, it doesn't have there's no impact of influence. Okay, so a longitudinal study. A psychologist studies the same group of people at regular times over a period of years. The goal to this is to determine if their behavior or feelings have changed. Now, this can be time-consuming and precarious, meaning that participants can move or exit the study, say they don't want to be a part of it anymore. So this can be frustrating sometimes for psychologists. But it can also show behaviors and feelings over time. And I put a picture down here so you can see we have child A. So we might ask the child in 2004 when they're 2 years old. We might ask them again when they're 4 years old, and so on and so forth. We do it in a set number of years, so you can see it goes every 2 years. And we would see how the child or the person's opinions or feelings change. Now, a cross-sectional study is when individuals are separated into groups based on their age. They are randomly sampled, questioned or interviewed or observed at the same time, and they're less expensive and less time-consuming than longitudinal studies. So here we have the year of study. So in one group we have 2-year-olds, in another group we have 6-year-olds, in another group we have 8-year-olds. And we may ask them or show them pictures of, an elephant and say, what is this? And, can you describe this? And a 2-year-old may say, oh, it's gray, or, it's an elephant if they know that. And a 6-year-old may say something totally different. May say an elephant, it eats vegetables, it's, and an 8-year-old may give even more than that and say, oh, an elephant lives in Africa. They're typically found in Africa. They're endangered. So again, there might be, when we can see, what type of intelligences and beliefs and feelings there are. So comparing data. Now, some psychologists may just want to observe people and animals and record the data. Others want to compare the research in a relationship to examine different observations. So, from somebody else or maybe another observation they have done. So this creates a correlation, which is a relationship between two sets of data. Now, there's two different types of correlation, a positive one and a negative one. In the positive situation, a positive correlation would be, for example, if you have a higher intelligence and higher grades, that's a positive correlation. That's something we expect. Someone who has a higher intelligence sometimes may have higher grades. Or if you study a lot and you work hard in your classes, you'll typically get higher grades. We expect that. A negative correlation is something that we don't expect to happen. So for example, maybe a tennis player, I'm sorry, I should say player, a tennis player, and put that in here, player, a tennis player practicing for many hours. Geez, it's hard to write with this thing. Sorry I'm taking forever to do it, but it's a little hard, so I'm trying to do my best. So a tennis player practicing for many, many hours a day, and not really getting any better. Or somebody may be practicing the saxophone for 8 hours a day, and they're still playing the wrong notes, they're still playing the wrong music. That's something that we don't expect. We expect a person to get better if they practice, but if they're not, that's what we would call a negative correlation. So completing an experiment. An experiment is different than a research method. This is when a psychologist can control a situation. So in research methods, the psychologist does not technically all the time control what's going on. In an experiment, they control the situation, and they can decrease the influence of outside variables. So we have our hypothesis, which is an educated guess about the outcome of an experiment. We have independent variables and dependent variables that impact the experiments. So the independent variable is the one that will influence the experiment. Okay. So when we talk about experiments, people who are exposed to the independent variable or the changes are the experimental group. So we're giving them the experiment. Those who are not exposed to the independent variable are the controlled group. So we compare between which groups had the experiment done to them and which group has not. And most of the time, people don't know. Sometimes they do. Most of the time, people don't know if they're part of what group they are, because that could influence the investigation. Because if I tell you, hey, you're in the experimental group, you're gonna say, oh, this makes me feel excited, or oh yeah, I grew 2 inches when you gave me this medicine, So they don't typically tell people what group they're in, so people react in a normal way. And then finally, with our conclusion, we decide if the independent variable had an impact on the on the experimental group, and a lot of times the investigation or experiment has to be done multiple times, so that way it reduces any possible flaws that may have occurred, so we can make a proper conclusion. All right, everybody? Well, just make sure that you try your best on the questions. Reach out to me if you need help, and I will see you next time. Take care.